Brother cheats with my girlfriend. They get engaged. But dad disowns them and leaves a twist in his will. So, this happened when I was 17. Back then, I thought everything was pretty normal between me and my family. My older brother Chris was 25, and we'd always been close. I mean, we had to be, especially after our mom passed away when I was about 10. After that, it was just me, Chris, and our dad. Dad did his best to keep everything together. And to be fair, he was a great guy. He worked long hours but always made time for us. Dad was big on teaching us values, stuff like loyalty, honesty, and respect. He drilled into us how important it was to stay loyal to the people you care about. He even told us once, if either of you ever cheats on someone, don't expect me to stand by you. I always took that seriously. I mean, cheating was one of those things he just didn't tolerate. And I figured Chris felt the same way because, like I said, we were close. At the time, I was dating this girl named Ashley. We'd been together for a year, and I honestly thought she was it for me. We hung out all the time, texted each other every night, typical high school stuff. Looking back now, I know it was just young love or whatever, but back then, it felt serious. I really trusted her. She met my dad, came over for family dinners, and even hung out with Chris a lot when she was around. I never thought much of it. She and Chris always seemed to get along, and I was just happy to see them bonding. Anyway, one day I got out of practice early. I was on the track team, and our coach decided to cut the session short that day. Something about getting ready for some event or whatever. So I ended up getting home like an hour earlier than usual. I remember thinking, hey, this is nice. I'll get to relax for a bit before everyone else gets home. I walked through the front door, tossed my bag on the floor, and went straight to the kitchen for a snack. I was thinking about calling Ashley to see if she wanted to hang out or watch a movie. Then I noticed Chris's car was in the driveway. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was usually out at work or hanging with his friends, but I figured he must have had the day off or something. I didn't see him downstairs, so I assumed he was probably just chilling in his room. But as I made my way up the stairs, I heard voices coming from my room. And not just any voices. Chris's and Ashley's. I stopped halfway up the stairs and my stomach kind of dropped. I remember thinking, okay, that's weird. Why are they in my room? I mean, it was my space, you know? No one usually went in there unless I was there too. But I brushed it off at first. Like maybe they were just looking for something, or maybe Chris was showing Ashley some video game or whatever. But then I heard them laughing, and not in a casual way. It sounded different. So I took a deep breath and walked the rest of the way up, trying to ignore the weird feeling building up inside me. I reached the door and pushed it open, and there they were, together, on my bed. And yeah, you know what they were doing. I don't have to spell it out. It was like everything just froze. I stood there staring, and they looked up at me, both with these shocked expressions like they got caught with their hands in the cookie jar or something. Ashley scrambled off the bed, and Chris was just sitting there, looking like he didn't know what to say. And honestly, I was too stunned to react. It was like my brain was trying to catch up to what my eyes were seeing. I mean, Chris, my own brother, and Ashley, the girl I'd been with for a whole year, it was like everything I thought I knew about them just shattered in that moment. I felt this rush of anger, betrayal, and just, I don't know, sadness all at once. I couldn't even get words out at first. They both started talking like they were trying to explain, but none of it made sense. Chris was saying stuff like, "Man, I'm sorry, we didn't mean for this to happen." And Ashley kept going on about how they had feelings for each other. I just stared at them, feeling my hands shake, and I couldn't believe they were trying to justify it. "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I remember yelling. "Are you kidding me right now?" It felt like my whole world just flipped upside down. Chris tried to get off the bed, reaching out like he wanted to apologize, but I stepped back. I wasn't going to let him get close. I told them both to get out of my room and leave me alone. I couldn't deal with looking at them anymore. I remember Ashley saying something like, "Please, let's talk about this." But I wasn't hearing any of it. I told her we were done. Right there. No hesitation. I mean, what else was there to say? She cheated on me with my own brother of all people. And Chris, I didn't even know what to say to him. It felt like everything between us was just broken. When they finally left the room, I just stood there for a while, staring at the empty space where they had been. It felt unreal, like I'd walked into some messed up version of my own life. I kept replaying everything in my head, thinking about how they'd been sneaking around behind my back and how I never saw it coming. And the worst part was, I couldn't help but wonder how long it had been going on. Had they been lying to me this whole time? I thought about all the times they were hanging out, and I felt like a complete idiot for not seeing the signs. After that, I just kind of collapsed onto the floor. I felt like everything I knew and trusted was gone. I sat there for a while, trying to process what just happened, but my mind was all over the place. The room felt smaller, like it was closing in on me. I couldn't believe that the two people I trusted the most had done this. I knew things would never be the same after that. I couldn't imagine forgiving either of them. I didn't know how I was going to face my brother or what I was going to tell my dad. All I knew was that everything felt messed up, and I just wanted to get as far away from them as possible. So I grabbed my stuff, went downstairs, and left the house. I just needed to get out and clear my head. I wandered around for hours, not knowing where to go or what to do. I didn't want to go back home. I didn't want to see Chris, and I definitely didn't want to run into Ashley again. I felt alone, betrayed, and just lost. Like, how do you even move on from something like that? Looking back now, I wish I could say I handled it better, but honestly, I didn't know what else I could have done. It's not every day you walk in and see your own brother betraying you like that. And at 17, it felt like the end of the world. All I knew was that from that point on, things were never going to be the same, and that's how it all started. After everything went down, I was a wreck. I mean, how could I not be? My own brother and my girlfriend betrayed me in the worst way possible. I didn't know how to process any of it. I felt like I was just running on autopilot, trying to get through each day without thinking too much, but it was impossible. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was constantly reminded of what happened. When I finally made it home that night, Dad was waiting in the kitchen. I guess he could tell something was off because he was already looking at me with this worried expression. Usually he'd just ask how practice was or make small talk about what was for dinner, but this time he was straight to the point. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." At first, I tried to play it off, saying I was just tired and had a rough day. But Dad wasn't buying it. He could always tell when something was up with me. And honestly, I was so overwhelmed that it didn't take long before everything just came spilling out. I didn't even try to hold back. I told him everything, how I walked in on Chris and Ashley, how they tried to apologize, and how I couldn't handle it. I didn't leave out any details. It was like I needed him to understand just how messed up the whole situation was. As I was talking, I could see my dad's face changing. At first, he looked confused, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then, his expression just shifted to pure anger. He clenched his fists and his face got red, and I knew he was about to blow up. I'd only seen him that mad a few times before, and it was always when someone crossed a line he couldn't forgive. "You're telling me that your own brother did this to you?" he said, his voice all tense. "And with your girlfriend?" I nodded, feeling that anger and betrayal rising up in me again. "Yeah, Dad, that's exactly what happened. I can't even believe it." For a moment, it was just silent between us, like the kind of silence that feels heavier than anything. Dad took a deep breath, and then he just let loose. He started yelling for Chris, calling him down from his room. The whole house felt like it was shaking with the way his voice echoed through the walls. I could hear Chris's footsteps coming down the stairs, and part of me just wanted to disappear because I knew this was about to be a full-on explosion. When Chris finally came into the kitchen, he had that look like he already knew what was coming. He didn't even try to play dumb or act like he didn't know why Dad was mad. Instead, he looked right at me, and I could see this weird mix of regret and frustration on his face. But honestly, I wasn't in the mood to hear anything he had to say. Dad didn't waste any time. He started yelling at Chris, and it was brutal. "How could you do this to your own brother? What the hell were you thinking?" Dad's voice was so loud I thought the neighbors were going to hear. Chris tried to defend himself, but it was weak. "Dad, look, it wasn't planned. It just happened. We have feelings for each other." But Dad cut him off. "Feelings? You call betraying your own family feelings? You know what we've been through, and you still chose to hurt your brother like this?" It was like Dad was channeling all his anger, and honestly, I was right there with him. I wanted to yell too. I wanted to tell Chris how much he'd hurt me, how much he'd destroyed our bond, but I couldn't get the words out. I just stood there, feeling like I was watching everything fall apart. Chris tried again, his voice sounding more desperate. "Dad, it's not like that. We never meant for this to happen. It's just complicated." Dad wasn't having any of it. "There's nothing complicated about loyalty, Chris. You made a choice, and now you're going to face the consequences." And then he dropped the bombshell. He was kicking Chris out of the house, just like that. He pointed to the door and told him to pack his stuff and leave. Chris stood there, stunned, like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He looked at me like he was expecting me to say something, to step in or defend him, but I just stared back. I had nothing to say. "Dad, you're really doing this?" Chris asked, his voice shaky. Dad didn't even hesitate. "You betrayed your own brother. You disrespected this family. I don't want you under my roof anymore." Chris didn't argue after that. He just turned and walked up the stairs, and I could hear him slamming stuff around as he packed his things. I stayed in the kitchen, my head spinning. I knew what Chris did was wrong, but seeing Dad actually kick him out, it felt surreal. Part of me felt relieved, like, yeah, he deserved it. But another part of me couldn't believe this was really happening. It was like our family was falling apart right in front of me, and I had no idea how to stop it. After a while, Chris came back down, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He didn't look at me or Dad as he walked toward the door. Before he left, he paused for a second, his hand on the doorknob. "If this is how it's going to be, then I'm done with this family," he said, his voice low but cold. "I don't need any of you." And then, just like that, he was gone. The door slammed shut, and I was left standing there with Dad, who still looked like he was ready to punch a hole in the wall. I could see the disappointment and hurt in his eyes, and honestly, I felt guilty. I mean, I knew it wasn't my fault, but I couldn't help feeling like I was the reason our family was breaking apart. If I hadn't walked in on them, maybe things would have been different. Dad put a hand on my shoulder, and his voice softened a bit. "You did nothing wrong, kid. Chris made his choices, and now he's got to live with them." I nodded, trying to believe it, but it was hard to shake that feeling of everything falling apart. We didn't say much after that. We just sat down for dinner. But the whole time, there was this heavy silence between us. It was weird. Usually it was the three of us, laughing and talking about our day. But now it was just me and Dad, and I could feel the space where Chris used to be. It felt empty. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head. The look on Chris's face when I walked in, the way Dad kicked him out, and the moment Chris walked out the door and said he was done with us. I knew things were going to be different from now on. There was no going back. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but one thing was clear. The family I thought I had was gone, and I had to figure out how to deal with it. A few years went by after everything happened with Chris, and things didn't really get better between us. Honestly, I didn't expect them to. He moved out that night, and we pretty much cut all ties after that. I'd hear bits and pieces about him from our aunt or some mutual friends, but that was about it. Dad and I tried to move on, and for a while, it was just the two of us, making it work as best we could. But then, a couple years ago, Dad got sick. Cancer. At first, we thought it was just a flu or something. He was feeling tired all the time and lost some weight. But when he went to the doctor, they ran a bunch of tests, and the news came back bad. Stage 4. It was already too far along for them to do much, so it was more about managing the symptoms than actually getting better. It was like everything came crashing down again. I mean, after everything that happened, Dad was the one person I still had. He was my rock through all the crap with Chris and Ashley, and now he was the one fading away. I don't think I'd ever felt so scared and helpless in my life. I tried to stay strong for him, though. I figured he needed me to step up, and that's exactly what I did. I drove him to every appointment, stayed with him during the treatments, and did whatever I could to keep his spirits up. We watched a lot of old movies together, played cards, and talked about everything. Well, everything except Chris. That was kind of an unspoken rule between us. Neither of us brought him up, and I think it was easier that way. As Dad's condition got worse, he had to quit work, and I took on a couple of part-time jobs to help cover the bills. It was tough juggling work, school, and taking care of him, but I didn't mind. Dad had done everything for me growing up, and now it was my turn to be there for him. Despite everything, he always tried to keep things light. He'd crack jokes and act like everything was fine, even when I could see he was struggling. It was hard to watch, but I knew he didn't want me worrying too much. That's just how he was, always putting others first, even when he was the one hurting. One day, when things were getting really rough, Dad finally sat me down. "Listen, I want you to know how proud I am of you," he said. "You've been there for me through all of this, and I couldn't have asked for a better son." I felt a lump in my throat, but I forced a smile and told him, "You don't have to thank me, Dad. I'm just doing what you taught me." But deep down, I was breaking apart. I knew what he was trying to say. He was preparing me for when he wouldn't be around anymore. It was only a couple of months after that conversation that Dad passed. It happened at home, with me by his side. I had called our aunt, and she came over to be with us too. It was peaceful, but it still felt like my whole world had been ripped out from under me. He was my last real family, and now I was alone. The funeral was a blur. I remember standing there, surrounded by people. Some I recognized, others I didn't. They all came up to me, offering their condolences and telling me how great a guy my dad was. And they were right. He was. But the whole time, all I could think about was how much I wished he was still here. But you know what hurt the most? Chris didn't even bother to show up. Not a call, not a message, nothing. I hadn't heard from him since the day he walked out, and even when our aunt tried reaching out to let him know what was happening, he ignored it. I kept telling myself that it didn't matter, that it was better that he stayed away, but it still stung. I mean, this was his dad too. No matter what went down between us, he should have been there, at least for Dad. It felt like he had just erased himself from our lives completely. After the service, we gathered at my aunt's house for a small reception. A few of Dad's old friends shared stories about him, and I tried to smile and nod, but my mind kept drifting back to Chris. I don't know why, but I kept waiting for him to show up, thinking maybe he'd have a change of heart or something. But he never did. Later, we got into sorting out Dad's will. I had no idea what to expect because Dad never really talked about money or his plans. I figured there wouldn't be much left after all the medical bills, but it turned out Dad had some savings and investments I didn't even know about. And it wasn't just a little bit. He'd managed to save up a lot over the years. The lawyer went over everything with me, explaining that Dad had left me pretty much everything. His house, his savings, and the rest of his assets. I was stunned. I knew Dad trusted me, but I never expected to get so much. Then the lawyer mentioned that Dad had also left Chris a small amount. Barely anything compared to what he left me. Enough that Chris couldn't contest it, but not enough to make any real difference in his life. I didn't know how to feel about that. On one hand, it seemed fair, considering Chris never came back or even tried to make things right with Dad. But on the other hand, it felt so final, like Dad was making sure Chris couldn't just show up and take advantage after everything. Our aunt looked at me when the lawyer finished explaining, and she had this sad expression on her face. "He really wanted to make sure you were taken care of," she said. "He knew you'd be responsible." I nodded, trying to hold back the tears. I felt grateful, but also incredibly lonely. That night, I sat in my old room at my aunt's place, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything. I'd lost my dad. My brother was basically a stranger. And now I was left with this huge responsibility. It felt like my whole life had changed in a matter of months, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. I thought about the times Chris and I spent together as kids, the laughs we shared, the stupid arguments we had, and how we used to have each other's backs. Now, it felt like all of that was gone. And for what? Over a girl who wasn't even around anymore. It all felt so pointless. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Dad was right. Loyalty matters. Family matters. And if Chris didn't want to be a part of that, then maybe I just had to accept it and move on. It hurt, and it felt unfair. But I knew I couldn't change how things turned out. At the end of the day, all I could do was try to honor Dad's memory the best I could and figure out what came next. It was going to be tough, but I knew I owed it to him to keep going no matter how much it hurt. A few weeks after the funeral, I was just starting to figure out how to navigate things without Dad. It wasn't easy, but I was doing my best to manage everything, selling the house, dealing with paperwork, and just trying to move forward. I had a lot on my plate, and honestly, I was keeping busy to avoid thinking too much about how alone I felt. One day, out of nowhere, I got a message from Chris. I hadn't heard from him in years, not a single call, text, or anything after he walked out. It was short and to the point. "We need to talk." I remember staring at the screen, feeling all these mixed emotions. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part of me was curious. Why now? What did he want after all this time? I decided to meet up with him at a coffee shop downtown. I figured it was a neutral spot, and if things got heated, at least we wouldn't be at my place or somewhere too personal. When I got there, Chris was already sitting at a table, looking around nervously. He'd changed a lot, looked older, more tired. I could tell life hadn't been easy for him. I sat down, and there was this awkward silence for a minute. Neither of us really knew where to start, and I wasn't about to make the first move. I crossed my arms and waited for him to speak. Finally, he cleared his throat and started talking. "So, I heard about Dad," he said, not looking me in the eye. "I know I wasn't there, but I'm sorry." I shrugged, not really sure what to say. "Yeah, well, it's done now. What do you want, Chris?" He seemed to flinch a little, like he wasn't expecting me to be so blunt. "Look, I know I wasn't around. I know I messed up, but I'm struggling, man. I heard about the inheritance, and, well, I don't think it's fair that Dad left you everything and almost nothing for me." I felt this anger building up inside me. The nerve of him to come here after all this time and start talking about the money like it was owed to him. "Are you serious right now? That's why you wanted to talk? Because of the money?" He held up his hands like he was trying to calm me down. "Look, I get it. You're mad, and you have every right to be. But I'm your brother, and I need your help." I leaned forward, glaring at him. "Brother? You haven't acted like my brother in years, Chris. You bailed on us when things got tough. You didn't even show up when Dad was sick or when he died. And now you want money? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I know, I know. But things were complicated. Ashley and I were trying to figure things out. And don't even bring her up, I snapped, cutting him off. I don't want to hear any excuses about her or how complicated things were. You made your choice when you walked out. You had years to make things right, and you didn't. You could have picked up the phone, visited Dad, something, but you didn't. Chris looked down at the table, and for a second, I thought maybe he'd actually listen. But then he shook his head and started up again. You're just like Dad, you know that? Always holding grudges. Maybe that's why he left you everything. He was just using that fight as an excuse to favor you. That was it for me. I slammed my hand on the table, and a couple of people nearby turned to stare, but I didn't care. Favor me? Are you kidding? Dad gave you every chance, Chris. He tried to reach out and you pushed him away. You never even tried to fix things. I could see Chris's face harden, and I knew he wasn't getting it. Look, I'm not here to fight. I'm just asking for a little help. Things have been rough, and I thought maybe you'd be willing to share some of the inheritance. I felt like laughing, but it wasn't the kind of laugh where something's funny. It was more like the kind of laugh you do when you're just so fed up with someone's crap that it's all you can do. Share? You want me to share the money Dad left me after everything you did? You didn't even show up for his funeral, Chris. You think you deserve anything after that? He flinched, and for a second, he looked genuinely hurt. I was going through stuff, all right? You have no idea what it's like. No, Chris, I don't. And you know why? Because you shut me out. You made it clear you wanted nothing to do with this family, so don't come crawling back now acting like you're entitled to anything. You weren't there for Dad when he needed you, and you sure as hell weren't there for me. The silence between us was thick. Chris's face was red, and he looked like he wanted to say more, but he held back. I could see it. He was angry, but he also knew he had no ground to stand on. I thought maybe we could start fresh, you know? Move past everything. I shook my head, feeling more exhausted than anything else. I'm not holding a grudge, Chris. I'm just not pretending like everything's fine when you've done nothing to fix what you broke. You made your choice a long time ago. He sighed again, but it was more like a frustrated sigh. Fine, if that's how it's going to be. But just know you're making this about you, not about Dad. I couldn't believe he was trying to spin it that way. This isn't about me, Chris. It's about you taking responsibility for what you did. And if you really think you're entitled to anything after abandoning us, then you're not the brother I used to know. He stood up, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. All right, I get it. You don't want anything to do with me. But don't come crying to me when you end up just like Dad, bitter and alone. That stung, but I didn't let it show. I just stared at him, keeping my face blank. I'm not the one who walked away, Chris. You did. And if you can't see that, then we're done here. He glared at me one last time before storming out of the coffee shop. I watched him leave, feeling that familiar mix of anger and disappointment. I don't know what I expected, but I guess a part of me hoped he'd come back and genuinely apologize, that maybe we could start fixing things. But he was the same Chris who left years ago, always trying to shift blame and make excuses. I sat there for a while after he left, just staring at the empty seat. Part of me felt relieved that I finally got to say my piece, but another part of me was just tired. Tired of hoping things could go back to the way they were, and tired of pretending like Chris would ever change. At the end of the day, I knew I made the right call. Dad left me what he did for a reason, and Chris wasn't part of that picture anymore. I had to move forward, with or without him. After my blowout with Chris at the coffee shop, I tried to move on. I told myself it was over. I'd said what I needed to say, and if he didn't get it, that was on him. But of course, nothing's ever that simple. A couple of days later, I got a call from our aunt. She'd heard about our argument, and I could tell she wasn't too happy with how things went down. She asked if I could come over to her place to talk. I knew where this was going, but I figured I might as well hear her out. Our aunt had always been kind of like a mediator in the family, trying to keep everyone together even when things got messy. So I agreed, and a couple hours later, I was sitting on her couch, bracing myself for whatever lecture she had prepared. She didn't waste any time. I heard you and Chris had a bit of a fight the other day, she said, giving me that look, like the one she used to give when she was about to tell me I was being unreasonable. Yeah, we talked, I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. But it's not like it changed anything. He still thinks he's entitled to Dad's money, and I'm not about to hand it over just because he's in a tough spot. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. Look, I know you and Chris have a lot of history, and I know what he did was wrong, but he's still your brother, and if you keep holding on to this grudge, You're never going to have a relationship with him. I felt my hands clench into fists, and I had to take a deep breath before I responded. Auntie, it's not about holding a grudge. It's about what he did and how he's acting now. He had years to fix things with Dad, and he didn't. He had years to reach out to me, and he didn't. And now when there's money involved, suddenly he cares? She nodded, but I could see she was still trying to get me to see it from his side. I know it seems like that, but maybe he's reaching out because he finally realizes he made mistakes. Maybe he's just too proud to say it outright. I shook my head. Or maybe he's just saying whatever he thinks will get him the money. I don't trust him, Auntie, not after everything. She looked at me for a moment like she was weighing her next words. You know, when your dad was sick, he always hoped you and Chris would work things out. He told me he wanted you two to have each other, especially after he was gone. That stung. I mean, I knew Dad wanted us to get along. What parent wouldn't? But he also knew what Chris did, and he knew why I was keeping my distance. I know Dad wanted that, but it's not that simple. Chris burned that bridge when he betrayed me, and I'm not going to pretend everything's fine just because he suddenly decides he wants to be brothers again. My aunt sighed again, this time more heavily. I get it. And I'm not saying you have to forgive him right away or even give him any money. But don't shut him out completely. If you close that door, you might regret it later. I didn't say anything for a while. I just stared at the floor, thinking about everything. Part of me knew she was right. Holding on to all this anger wasn't exactly healthy, but another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that Chris was only reaching out because he had something to gain. Look, Auntie, I get what you're saying, I finally said, but he made his choice. I'm not closing the door, but I'm not letting him walk back in like nothing happened either. He has to show he's actually sorry, not just because he wants money. She didn't look entirely satisfied, but she nodded. Fair enough. Just promise me you'll think about it, okay? I promised. But in my head, I was already pretty set. I wasn't going to change my mind just because Chris suddenly decided to show up. If he wanted to be part of my life, he was going to have to earn that. A few days later, I got another message from Chris. This time, it was longer. He said he'd thought about what I said and wanted to try to fix things between us, but he still mentioned the inheritance. I don't want all of it, he wrote, but maybe you could help me out a bit, just a loan or something. I stared at the message for a while, my finger hovering over the reply button. A loan? After everything? I felt that anger bubbling up again, but I took a breath. Maybe he really was desperate. But then I remembered how he looked at the coffee shop, how he kept trying to justify what he did, and how he still tried to blame me and Dad for everything going wrong in his life. I put my phone down without replying. I wasn't going to get dragged into this again. If Chris wanted to fix things, he needed to do it without bringing up the money every time. I wasn't going to be some ATM for him to run to whenever he was struggling. The next day, I got a call from our aunt again. She asked if I'd thought about what she said. I told her I did, but my mind hadn't changed. I want to see him try for real, Auntie. If he can't do that without bringing up money, then I don't know what to tell you. She sighed, and I could tell she was disappointed, but she didn't push me further. All right, just keep an open mind, okay? After that, I didn't hear from Chris for a while. I focused on my own life, trying to get everything in order. I got a new job, moved to a different apartment, and started building my own life outside of all the drama. It felt good to have a fresh start, even if a part of me still felt that nagging ache whenever I thought about how things ended with Chris. I think the hardest part was feeling like I'd lost my brother for good. We used to be so close, and now it was like we were strangers. I'd see other people hanging out with their siblings, and it had hit me. Chris and I would probably never have that again, not unless he really changed. But at the same time, I knew I had to stand by my decision. If I let him walk all over me now, what kind of message would that send? That he could betray me and our dad, disappear for years, and then just come back when it was convenient for him? I wasn't going to let that happen. In the end, I knew I was making the right choice, even if it didn't feel great. Sometimes sticking to your boundaries is the hardest thing to do, especially when it involves family. But I knew if Dad were still around, he'd tell me to stay strong and not let anyone take advantage of me. So that's what I did. I moved forward with my life, holding on to the hope that maybe one day, Chris would actually understand what he did and try to make things right. Not for the money, but because he really wanted to be brothers again. Until then, I was done giving him chances.